Episode 6 of the Torque Factor podcast is here, and I'm your host, Scott Brown. This is a place where we discuss all things moving the automotive service industry forward, focusing on expanding knowledge and awareness around tools, equipment, education, and industry trends. This episode's featured guests are Jorge Menchu from AESwave.com and Matt Fanslow from Riverside Automotive, where we go deep on electronics, board-level repair, and beyond. VehicleServicePros.com is a trusted online resource for vehicle service and repair information, fleet maintenance management, and the latest products for servicing America's fleet of vehicles. It is the official website of professional tool and equipment news, fleet maintenance, and professional distributor magazines. VehicleServicePros.com is on the pulse of the industry, sharing new technology, the latest product information, and market trends to keep our readers in the know-how. Okay, that brings us to our recall segment. First up, NHTSA Recall 20V as in Victor-314. This is covering just under 136,000 2018 to 2019 Acura and Honda vehicles. The affected vehicles are equipped with defective fuel pumps. This recall has many of the similarities discussed within Episode 2 of the Torque Factor covering Toyota and Lexus automobiles, where a manufacturing process of the fuel pump impeller by supplier Denso is causing it to swell and break, resulting in a vehicle stall and or a no-start condition. Okay, the next recall is NHTSA 20 Victor-334, and this involves 2017 to 2020 Chrysler Pacifica Plug-in Hybrid electric vehicles built between August of 2016 and June 2020. Some vehicles have experienced fires originating at the B+ pass-through connector post behind the driver's seat. FCA has discovered a low torque condition on several sample vehicles. FCA began notifying owners on June 22, 2020, for them to bring their vehicles in for a preliminary inspection, and if a problem is found, they would be provided with alternate transportation until a remedy is available. Additionally, FCA advises owners not to park their vehicles inside or around other vehicles and to keep liquids out of the backseat area. It's a sound best practice to check for open recalls on vehicles passing through your service departments. Okay, next up is a case study from Diagnostic Network. Member Michael Christofferson, who's a mobile diagnostic tech, was called out to a shop that had a 24-year-old Mercedes-Benz that had condemned the electronic control module and acquired a used one, and they were unable to get the car started. He figured out that the vehicle was actually in a theft mode where the immobilizer was set, and he goes into the challenges that he ran into. He is regularly doing board-level type work, EEPROM type work, and so he began going through this board, not knowing exactly which chip is which, and he fortunately provided us with a lot of really good information here. So in the show notes, you'll have a link directly to it, but if you're watching the YouTube video version of this podcast, you'll see all of the data that he's provided, including images. He did eventually find out that which chip was the immobilizer chip, and he was able to desolder it from the board, desolder the one from the original board, and then swap them, and successfully get the car back up and running. So the reason I'm bringing this case study in is because it's going to lead into our main discussion, and that is electronics and control modules, and the amount of electronics that are on these vehicles, and they are lasting longer and longer, and you may find yourself in a situation where a new module or a remanufactured module is not available, and it may be worth your while to look into possibly repairing this yourself. This now brings us to the main topic, where Jorge Menchu from AESwave and Matt Fanslow from Riverside Automotive join myself for a discussion on board-level electronics repair. So let's have a listen. Okay, on the call today, we've got Jorge Menchu from AESwave in Fresno, California. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Scott. Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Hey, welcome. And we also have Matt Fanslow from Red Wing, Minnesota. Both of these guys are really good friends of mine. Thanks for coming on the show, Matt.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, welcome. I really appreciate you guys putting aside some time to share some knowledge and information. We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff related to modules, module programming, security, and that kind of stuff. So we'll jump right in. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you guys is where you think the industry is heading as far as needs for service, based on the fact that there's a lot of aging technology, a lot of multi-module vehicles that will be entering 20, 25 year span, and a lot of these OEMs they stop supporting certain modules on vehicles. And so when we have a module failure and there isn't one available, what's the option for the technician? Outside of, say, a rebuilt module, what if they can't even get a module rebuilt? What do they do? So let's start with you, Matt. What are you seeing out there?
Well, I've run into this exact scenario on a vehicle with a driver, and the PCM was bad, failed due to an ignition coil, and a new module was out of the question, no longer supported.
What year car was that, would you guess?
It wasn't that old. At least to me, it wasn't that old. I believe it was a 2004.
Okay.
Maybe an 03, but I think it's an 04.
Wow.
And, yeah, so trying to find a reman was worth about probably twice as much as the vehicle. Not insinuating this car was a pile or rusted out. We're in the Rust Belt. That happens. It was a good-looking car, well-kept, bad PCM, not available new, remanufactured, was extremely expensive compared to the value of the vehicle. So a little bit of research, and I found that I could open up that module, go to a supplier of electrical components, and order up 6 new drivers, install them on a circuit board. They're surface mounted, so fairly easy. And a soldering rework station, a little bit of time, new drivers and new resistors. And I, ended up fixing this module for good money for the shop, cost savings to the customer. And I feel, not insinuating like my skill level is so good, but it just felt like a quality repair that we could stand behind.
So I can see that repair. Was this is a vehicle that runs the actual primary driver inside the ECM, right? So
yes.
Primary voltage, that high primary voltage is actually going right to the ECM, which blows me away. Why manufacturers do that? It seems a little dangerous. A lot of other manufacturers don't do that, right? The driver, the high voltage driver, is in the coil, or in the module connected inside the coil or what have you. So, on that particular vehicle, how much time do you think you had in that repair?
I had less time in the repair than I did in the research.
Okay.
All in all, taking the module out, opening it up, accessing the circuit board, cleaning off the coating for the components, desoldering and resoldering and putting it back together. I probably took my time. I had less than 2 hours invested. Okay.
And had you already gathered experience and skill in soldering, desoldering surface-mounted components?
Yeah. I got my start with General Motors instrument clusters.
Okay.
Some friends of mine were telling me about how they were doing that, replacing stepper motors and finding some areas on the circuit boards, which, again, these were all surface-mounted components, so they don't poke through the circuit board. They kind of lay on top on these pads of solder. And the solder joints tend to be not very, very high quality and don't last. So you start getting cracks, and it causes a myriad of different issues, some more common than others. And that's kind of where I got my start.
Okay.
Yeah,
imagine those boards on a vehicle, right? A mobile apparatus, and the thing's shaking and vibrating and doing all this stuff. Not like your VCR or your VCR. What am I saying? DVD player.
You're dating yourself a little bit.
My DVD player. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. Pretty crazy. So, so what else? I mean, you had to do some research. How did you just started doing some Googling and started reading up on stuff on your own time, right?
On my own time. Yep. Not on shop time, at home. It kind of started out Googling, and then some of those friends that were talking about the General Motors clusters. I asked them a little bit, really just finding out you can do it. So then I opened up the module, and then I could read the part numbers on these components, which was, that's a tremendous help. Then you can Google those and find a couple of suppliers. So two big ones I know of offhand are DigiKey and Mauser. Yeah, Mauser I'm pretty familiar with. I've purchased a lot of stuff from them. And so, that's one of the things I learned a long time ago from our buddy George here, talking about data sheets, right? You want to find out what the heck that thing is and what it does and what kind of conditions it's supposed to work under. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Very powerful. Back in the old days, learning anything was very, very difficult. But today, it's a lot easier because there's so much access to information. And that's, it's a catch-22, but it's considering the older cars, what our discussion is here, it's going to help keep them on the road. Because, like the repair that Matt just described, you don't have to be an electronics expert to do it. It's a matter of, developing the skills to do the research and find the answers, which are a lot of times out there. I'll give you an example. We had a student from Fresno City College, had this turbocharged Chrysler or something. I forget what it was. It was a collector's item, and it was missing out. Ignition was missing out. Well, he found on an enthusiast forum that there's a capacitor that's leaking, and here are the part numbers. Go get it, change it, and it'll fix it. So he brought the computer over to us. At first glance, inspection of the board, you couldn't see any capacitor leakage, but we went ahead and pulled the capacitor anyway, and sure enough, underneath it, it was leaking. So we put in the parts that he brought over. He took it back, and it worked fine. So he wasn't an electronics expert, but he did the research. He found it, and he could do it. So back in the old days, I used to say, part of being a good technician is being able to find the information you need, which was a lot harder back then, absorb it, and then applying it. So today I would change that to say, develop the ability to find it and follow the instructions and do it. And you could probably accomplish quite a bit putting in those fundamental skills in place that Matt just mentioned. How to solder without overheating the board and pulling a trace off, using the right type of solder, and just, learning how to do basic inspections. Crack solder, just like Matt mentioned, it's very important. So, for example, if you're going to build an electronic circuit, and this is one of the great joys of getting started in electronics by Forrest Mims and building circuits, you learn what goes wrong fundamentally. Because when you build a circuit, you got a diagram, you build a circuit, and it doesn't work. Now you have to figure out how it's supposed to work and how to diagnose it. If you do it a handful of times, you'll see that there's a pattern to it. First thing is, are the power and grounds every place they're supposed to be? Are all the solder joints good? And you always start there. So you get a board, you got an issue with it. First thing you do is look for the anything that's burned up and broken solder joints, and you might want to get a microscope to some level. They got a lot of great scopes out there now that are meant for doing that. And when in doubt, heat it up and reflow it. So those are the fundamentals. And, whether you're doing this for building circuits or to repair cars, you build circuits, it's going to help you to repair cars. When you question a solder joint and you're not sure, just reheat it and just let it flow again. Do close inspections, look for anything where there might be abnormal heat in an area. And then that doesn't mean that component's bad. And as you start building electronic circuits, you start to understand the role of the components, even on a computer for a vehicle. And if you can recognize the component, it's just a basic building block in a lot of cases. If it's a discrete component, well, they all behave a certain way. Like, for example, if you come across a transistor, an NPN transistor, well, the basic testing is all the same. You might not know when it's supposed to turn on, but you know what turns it on, and then you can monitor the output. So you put it all together, it's just a great opportunity for learning. The more you understand about it, the more you see the patterns, the more it fits into all levels of your diagnostics, including fixing PC boards. And again, it just falls back to your ability to do research. Today, if you're a research king, you're ahead of the ball game.
Yeah, so if somebody out there is starting to think about, hey, you know what, I need to know a little bit more about this. I remember the old days, and I going back 30 years, where would we go for more information? Well, you'd go down to Radio Shack and buy some of those books, right? Those elementary electronics books that gave you the fundamentals. Well, now you can start Googling, and what do we need to know? We need to know what Ohm's law is, but maybe what some of the components are, right? We need to know what a capacitor is.
It's a catch-22. It helps to know that, but like the situation with the City College student here in Fresno, he was not an electronics expert by any means of measure, and but somebody who was wrote down exactly what you need to know and what you need to do. So, and I point this out because a lot of people hold themselves back because they're scared to get involved in something that they don't know. But there's an open door out there because of all the knowledge that's available to you. And a lot of times it's easy to identify where the problem is or where it looks like the problem is because there's a heat signature, or components burned up. Mm-hmm. Now that's where your understanding of electronics comes in is when you can't tell what part it was. And you can't find somebody who's telling you what part goes there. Then you got to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it becomes a little bit more difficult. But the door is open for people to get involved. And then if you look at everything as a process, get them involved, then you start getting involved in electronics, you get more interest, you see the value in learning it, and it just compounds on itself. In my experience, after studying this and living it for, the last 30 years when I started building my own electronic projects, the value to an automotive technician of building their own electronic circuits and getting involved in electronics, it benefits every level of diagnostics.
Oh yeah, it gives you a deeper understanding as to what what's going on there in the circuit. And like going back to Matt's car, right? His car was misfiring. He's doing some diagnostics. He's going, hey, wait a minute, this thing is not turning on and off. And being able to validate, yeah, I know for sure it's inside that box. And then biting off some more, and then knowing that you can go down to the board level and make some repairs. So Matt, tell me a little bit more about the equipment that you're using to rework, desolder, or resolder, or what have you.
I started out very much on the cheap, and I don't want to sound like I spent that I have a ton of money invested right now, but I really started out on the cheap. When I started, we still had a Radio Shack.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I went down there and I got myself a soldering iron that was a little more appropriate for circuit board work than what I had, which is kind of the big pistol-looking soldering iron that we're maybe more accustomed to. I got a solder sucker, which was you plug it in and it heats up the tip, and it's kind of got a squeeze bulb.
Yeah, a little red bulb on the backside there. Yep. Yeah, that thing works great.
It does. And that's what I started out with, and got the solder was there, and of course somebody was there to help me pick out the solder, and I got the desoldering braid, and that's kind of how I went at it. And I've had some really good successes, and I've had some epic fails, and I've been upgrading equipment as I go. Now I have a kind of what they would call a rework station, which is a soldering iron, and also a hot air station that it blows really, really hot air at components on a circuit board. And a lot of times you find, especially on the surface mount type of components, that works better than the soldering iron, especially for removal, to get that area nice and hot enough to melt the solder, not wreck the board, and then lift.
Yeah, and I've seen some of those. So is your unit, can you control the temperature on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then are you using like a little probe to give you an estimation on what the temperature of your component is, or are you just going by the instrument and you're dialing it into a specific temperature?
Yeah, I'm going by the instrument.
Okay. And then where did you find the information about how hot you need to get it to do the solder, to loosen the solder up to the point you can rework it and then not damage any of the components?
Like you said, there's a plethora of information out there from many different sources. The two companies I mentioned, Mauser and DigiKey, they have information on their websites. Quite a bit of free training material. Websites like professional repair websites like Diagnostic Network, there's a lot of posts on there about this type of work. So there's a lot to be found there. And then, there's no denying it. There's a lot of videos going up by techs on automotive stuff, or just circuit board repair, or we've been mainly focusing on the surface mount type. There's a lot of stuff on video providers like YouTube and Vimeo, and they will mention temperatures, or they might just have a piece of equipment that's very much like the one you have or are looking at to buy. So there's a ton of information. And then probably the right way to do it is to some of the modules that you've replaced that there was not a core or anything, keep them around, take them apart, and just practice taking stuff off, putting it back on. You have no intentions of maybe fixing this particular module, but it's a good way to start getting a feel for how you're going to do this, how you're going to do that, what temperature to set. This is a little cold. This is way too hot. I started leaving black marks on the components or on the board itself. So almost like using diagnostic equipment like an oscilloscope. Don't start out on a broken car.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea to take the old modules, and I've done that in the past too. I've taken modules, had no core, and then I wanted to take it apart and dissect it some more and try to figure out what's going on. So that's a great way to go about solving or enhancing your skill set so that you can address it properly.
Removing or replacing a single resistor, maybe not such a big deal. But so maybe a controller of some sort, where it's multi-leg, like many legs. I'm not talking like 6 or 8 legs. I'm talking, 30, 32 legs.
Yeah.
You might want to practice on something you don't care about before, I'm trying to fix this car, and if I screw up, now who takes responsibility?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. Oh, so, you explained about one car that you had a problem with. So how are you seeing an increase in frequency of this type of, challenge coming through your work base?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One reason is just because now it's an option. Okay. Before you would have just replaced it or tried to replace it, told the customer to, buck up. I didn't break it, build it, or buy it. This is how much it's going to take to fix it. Where now we have this option, and I don't try to abuse that option. There's certain times where I don't feel like that's the proper repair, that I'll have more time invested trying to fix this than just doing the right thing and getting the replacement. Or if I'm going to do that, I'm doing it kind of with training in mind. This going to the boss saying, look, I'm going to try to do this. There's no way we're going to get paid for it. But I feel like this is the way things are moving in our trade, that I want to be able to offer more of this, and I need this kind of as a training. So yeah, we're seeing more and more of it, and also just thinking to do it. So I don't know if I should even mention it because I don't remember the age of the vehicle. I want to say it was a very early 80s Mercedes. The HVAC did not work. The blower didn't come on. The AC didn't work. And I got the module out, mostly for testing, back probing.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really easy to split apart. So I was kind of condemning that module, and I popped it open. And I could see very, very easily without any aid, to see, I could see the solder joints were cracked, and then the solder was no longer shiny. It was kind of this almost like pewter.
Mm-hmm.
And when I touched it with a soldering iron, it didn't melt. It just disappeared.
Oh, okay.
So I reflowed and added solder to all these points that I could see that were very obviously failed.
Mm-hmm.
And it fixed the car. It's still fixed to this day, which this would have been a few years ago.
You resurrected it. Good job.
By accident? Yeah, it's better to be lucky than good.
Oh, man.
But I would just say that we're seeing more of it, A, because it's become an option. B, now I've done a few of them, word around town. And, I don't live in a huge town. I think where the shop is, population's about 20,000, probably a little less. Word gets around that you can do this stuff. So now people are bringing vehicles of their own volition, or shops are referring them to us saying, hey, let Matt have a crack at this. Your cluster's not working. See what he thinks.
Yeah. So you've been shopping or broadcasting your talents around town to other shops to let them know, hey, you guys run into a challenge, send it my way. Or are they bringing it to you, like subletting it to you, or they send a customer over, or mix of both? Both.
Yep,
okay.
Mix of both. Yeah, it's been a mix of both. And I tell the shops I'm not out to take away their clients. If they want to send them, the client doesn't have to know I was ever involved.
Sure. Okay.
And
awesome.
We'll stand behind it, behind them. Customer doesn't need to know I was there.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. I'm glad that we got to chat about just some of the rework stuff. I know we're just kind of touching the surface on that, but I think that gives some folks some ideas or some comfort where they can start to explore this stuff. So we were talking about the board level repairs and understanding some of the fundamentals there. And George was saying that you don't necessarily have to know exactly how everything works. You just seek out the research on where the problem area might be, and then figure out what you need to do to fix it. So the example that you gave us with that older Chrysler with the turbo application had an ignition problem, and somebody had written a story about it in a forum somewhere about a failed capacitor and it on an initial inspection it didn't have any visual, but he learned where the capacitor was. There were probably pictures telling him where to look on that board, I would take it, and they took it apart. So when you go through and you've got to reflow and all that kind of stuff, what do we need to know about the products that we're using? The solder, the cleaning, all of that. What would you say, George, are some of the basic elements there that we need to be knowledgeable about?
Yeah, this is kind of important, so you don't create a problem later on, or you do the best repair. I mean, that's ultimately the goal. So if you're taking off an IC chip or something like that, you want to take off all the solder, because you don't know what solder they used, and it's better that when you put on your solder, you're not mixing it with old solder. That would be the ideal situation.
Okay, so explain for just a second. If you don't know what solder's on there, and then you use solder that has a different mix, right? There's ratios of solder, and you mix the wrong combo, you can have what? Some kind of a galvanic corrosion?
No, it's not really a big deal as far as something bad's going to happen. But what it does is it gives you a more professional level repair.
Okay.
So let's we're talking about older cars. So the older cars could be leaded solder, where on the newer cars it's going to be unleaded solder.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't want to mix it. It probably wouldn't be a good idea. You can and get away with it, I'm sure, but they just have different characteristics. So if you're going to take a part off, especially if you're working with an expensive component, you might as well clean it, suck off all the old solder, and then put on your new solder. And if it's a newer car, I wish I could tell you a year when lead-free solder became the rule. You want to use lead-free solder. If you're in a situation where, if you're not doing production, you can get away probably with lead solder. I don't know what the requirements are in the world, for doing a repair. But if you were to use lead solder, it usually melts a little quicker, easier to get on. It adheres better. You have more leeway. Leaded solder, you got to be more careful on temperatures and you have to have the right solder. If you get the wrong leaded solder, it becomes a pain in the neck. If you get the wrong unleaded solder, it becomes a pain in the neck sometimes.
Okay.
It doesn't stick as good.
All right. So explain to us the best practices on removing all the existing solder.
Well, just, using those tools the suction tools is a good way to do it. But you got to be careful because you're still heating it up and you don't want to overheat it and ruin the board. So, once you get your component off, you can clean it off separately, but you got to be careful because all that heat is no longer being spread out. If you put the component down on a piece of board or something, a different top, and it's not on the PC board, then that heat is dissipating as good as it was when it was on the PC board.
Okay.
So you don't want to cook anything. Yeah. Especially if you got a component that has really small wires coming out of it, terminals, whatever you want to call them. I forget the actual name.
Legs. We call them legs, right?
There you go. That's it. So you want to clean that off. And if it's newer, chances are it's lead-free. You might as well stick with it. And a lot of times lead-free, you got to have some kind of paste on there to get it to stick and to clean off the board. So call up a lead company, a solder company. I shouldn't say lead. I should say solder. Call up a solder company and tell them what you're doing, and they can set you up with a couple of options, I'm sure. And then the other thing is if you're changing a power transistor, it's probably on a heat sink, and it's probably got some kind of thermal material on there, like a grease or something, to hold it in place so the heat transfers very well. You don't want to forget that, otherwise you're creating a heat problem.
Right, that's the paste, right? The paste helps to transfer the heat out of that power electronics device into the mass that it's mounted to.
Yeah, and if you've changed a microprocessor on a PC, you probably already have done that.
Yeah, or if you're really old school, where you were working on old GMs or Fords or whatever, where you're changing out modules on the distributor, on the distributor, you want to make sure you put that funny looking stuff that came in the package, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. Also, they've got that, and I think Matt mentioned it too. The little braided stuff for sucking the solder out. So
that
you
works
get
good.
Yeah, that
works very good.
So do you heat that up? You heat that up too, or are you just moving that into the solder and it just kind of flows?
It's a copper braid. You put it down there and you just heat it up, and the copper braid will suck up the solder. It does a very, very good job. And the nice thing about that is, and it's been a long time since I've used it, but I think the nice thing about that is so you could put the soldering iron. Well, you got your solder pad. You put the braid on top of the solder pad. You put your soldering iron on top of the braid, and so the heat's going to work its way down. And potentially, you're going to use the least heat necessary to suck out all the solder.
Okay.
Because you'll watch it; it'll just get sucked up like it's being sucked out of a straw.
vacuum. Yeah.
Yeah, in a vacuum. It's pretty amazing. So, Scott, there's one other thing that I think is important to mention for beginners that get into this.
Mm-hmm.
Don't trick yourself. Components can look the same and be totally different. Just because it has 3 legs doesn't mean it's a transistor. It could be a regulator. It could be all sorts of things, but it could be in the exact same package.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a failed device and you can't identify any part numbers on it, one way to maybe recognize it is look, follow the traces out from the device and see where it goes to. And then if you see a similar device, do the traces go to the same components? Now you're upping the ante that it might be the same, but doesn't mean that it is. And that's an easy one to get caught on.
Good point. So, Matt, in most cases, are you finding the components are well identified?
I would have to say yes.
Yeah.
At least the components I've been dealing with mainly.
Mm-hmm.
And
until they're burned.
Until
right.
they're burned up or popped open or whatever, and maybe there's another one just like it. So what you're saying, George, is that maybe you got one that's damaged, and then if you kind of look around and you've got similar looking, and you can kind of see that the same type circuit methodology is taking place on those modules, and you're increasing your odds that that's probably the same component.
And there is other visual signs. So, for example, if you've got 4 power transistors, they're probably going to be lined up similar and on the circuit board and on a similar heat sink.
Right. Thinking about how the architect laid out the board, right? So he was given a task, say, this is a 4-cylinder. We need 4 individual injector drivers or coil drivers.
But as soon as the part numbers are gone, always... I like to approach things. I have rules and rules of thumb. And the rule of thumb is it looks the same, but isn't. So I'm going to prove it to myself because you don't want to make matters worse. You don't want to ruin more things.
Mm-hmm.
You get the wrong device in there and, you could have a 3-legged precision resistor, possibly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things that could be 3-legged and they can still be on heat sinks in the case of a driver. So you just try to minimize it. Does it look physically the same? Is it in the same type of mounting? And then if you really need to confirm it, follow the traces out and see if they all go to the same components.
Right.
And if that's so, probably the same.
Yeah. And if you're at the point where you've confirmed you've got a bad driver failed, right? Well, did the driver just fail or was it overloaded, right? So you want to look at that circuit closely to make sure that you're not going to fix it and put it back in service and have it do the same thing over again.
So one thing I should also qualify, if it's a driver, it's reaching out to the outside world and you know where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
But the deeper you get inside the board to components that are not reaching out to the outside world, like a transistor that might be changing from a logic level to powering a power transistor. That's old school speak, but it's easy to visualize that. So you got your logic coming out of your computer, turning on and off a little transistor that's turning on and off a bigger driver. So that one's a little bit harder because you have to trace it out to know where it goes to the outside world. So, that's when the comparison inside and trying to trace it to the outside, then you can get an idea of what it is. But if you're looking for a part number, then you want to be able to compare it to other things on the board. So all of these pieces come together to help you just have a little more confidence in what you do.
Cool. So let's talk just for a minute about any other safety things that need to be in place. What about like your static protection? Matt, are you utilizing any type of ground strap system or how do you make sure that you don't have a problem?
I have an anti-static mat,
and
that's not me as an actual mat that lays on the table.
Pun intended.
Right. I do get a lot of static from Matt sometimes, but you have an anti-static mat. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then I have the old style wrist clips to my table, which is grounded as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather try to do no harm.
Sure.
I don't know if it's overkill or not, but better safe than sorry, and it's not like it really hinders what I'm trying to do.
Sure. So I've been doing some of this stuff, for quite some time. I've always tried to take a practice of making sure that the component, right, the board or whatever, the ground. It's like in a case, right? So you take the ECM cover off or whatever, get that case grounded, and then when you go to touch something, you always touch the metal parts, right?
Yep.
And then you're kind of bringing yourself down, and because you can't, if you see an arc, you've killed it. But some of that stuff you can't even see, and the static electricity could kill these things. So, got to be real careful, so we don't induce another problem. It'd be sad
especially if you got a high-end PC board that you're working on with a lot of components. But over the years, messing with boards, they are pretty darn tough. I'm just amazed at how tough they are, but why take a chance? And the more expensive that computer is, the more important it's not to take a chance.
Good point. All right. So I'd like to segue over into the keys. I know that keys are something that you're running into more and more now, Matt. Not only keys, not so much cutting a key nowadays. You've got more security things involved with a key, whether it's a key fob or what have you. So, tell me a little bit about what you've been experiencing and what you've done to gear yourself up to handle more of these key related tasks.
Well, I could do quite a few to start just because of OEM tooling, scan tools specifically. So that got me into the game right off the bat. And then some aftermarket scan tools are better at it than others. So I was kind of getting by with that for a while, but more and more often I'd run into situations where I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. And one thing to think about is, we all know not all car manufacturers do everything the same. I don't think you have to be super well versed, but at least experienced with some Euro vehicles specifically. They don't do keys the way we're probably used to seeing them done with domestic and even some Asian vehicles, where you have a new key, wherever you got that from. Let's just say it's a good, legitimate key that needs to be programmed to the car. Usually the task involves either using an already programmed key or two to put it into a learn mode to add that key, or there's a scan tool function that now says, hey, this is a key that should allow this vehicle to start, and either there's time lapses or some sort of a function, and now the key works. Some European manufacturers, that is not what goes on. You call the dealer for a new key, and a few days later they ship it to you, and the key just works. Because they have, whatever the module is, whatever the car line, we'll just call them slots in the module for available keys. And the issue becomes is now that this car is on its second, third, fourth, fifth owner, or maybe the car started out as a company vehicle or even like a rental company vehicle, that those slots are now kind of eaten up. And when they're full, the action is you replace the module. There's now pieces of equipment out there that allow you to either open up the module itself or probe into some of the pins on the connector. So you would disconnect the module and you would pin in. Usually you open this up and you access a specific controller microchip on the board. And you either delete, I shouldn't say either, but it's really, if the slots are full, you're going to delete out one of the keys, one of those slots, so it's open, and now add in, the ID, if you will, of the new key, or assuming there's already open slots, you add the ID in, and that's how the key will work.
Interesting. So you've been doing some of those?
Very, very little, but I've done a couple. One I succeeded with. One somebody else had to help me succeed with it.
So what manufacturers are these?
Primarily, the ones that pop into mind are BMW and Mercedes.
Okay. And how many slots would you guess, or would you say that
I
you're
probably
finding?
Should know, but I want to say probably going to take flack. I want to say 12, but it could be
12
less.
slots.
Seems like 8 is popping into my head on some of them too.
Okay. So that was a limitation, baked into the vehicle when they were engineering the car, putting it together. How could it need more than 12 keys in its entire lifetime, right? And in most cases, that's probably never going to hit that ceiling. But
I would agree. I would agree. A lot of times it will never hit that. And
but you're seeing some of that, and that's as we move into the future, we're probably some guys are going to see that stuff. So that's that's some good knowledge to have. That's
on a purely adding a key type issue. The other issue is going back to what we were talking about earlier, where maybe I can't fix this module. Maybe I don't know component level what's wrong. Maybe it's not like it's just a misfire. Maybe it's a no communication type issue. So now I'm going to replace this module, and we'll just keep picking on PCMs. It could be a body control module if you want. It's failed in such a way I can't fix it. I don't have that type of skill or that type of time. I can pick up a used one for like $50 or $20 or whatever, cheap. Shouldn't even say dollar amounts.
Mm-hmm.
I can buy this module very cheap used, but they're not. You would call them VIN locked, or they get married to vehicles. So you can't just take this module, plug it in, program it, and away she goes. It doesn't work that way. You have to now either do something called virginizing, so that now everything, scan tool, vehicle, not that the vehicle actually thinks this, but everything acts like this is a module that you just took off the shelf.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or you either do the same type of thing, only you're taking the information off the old module, or maybe literally components like the chip where the, let's just say the VIN and immobilizer data is stored. You're removing it off the old module and putting it on this new, quote unquote, new module and putting it in, and it'll work.
Nice.
So that happens just as often, if not more often, than just a purely, I would like to add another key, or we lost all our keys and the dealer couldn't add this key. They said, I need this new module, and somebody gave me your name. And this is with the purely key stuff. I think locksmiths have been dealing with this for a while, especially the higher tech type of locksmiths that take great interest in this. And then the used module stuff is just going to become more and more common, as you're saying. Part support is weaning. And it's not even on super old cars. I mean, we're talking even 10 years old, and a big, big struggle to find certain parts for these cars, especially if they're high failure rate, but there's no support from the aftermarket from a big rebuilder. Right.
Yeah, and think about the market and what happened, 10 years ago, or 10 years ago we were in a recession. Automakers were there were a lot of things changing, 2008 to 2010, 2011, 2012. A lot of those suppliers, some of those guys went away. Tell me a little bit more about the VIN locking, that repair. How much of that have you been doing there, Matt?
In the grand scheme of things, not a lot. I know a lot of techs out there that they're so much, they see this way more than I do, and much better versed in it. But I've run into it where I've actually performed this is about a half a dozen times.
Okay, and where you're either virginizing or you're transferring the chip out of one module over to another module. Okay.
Usually I go with the chip swapping because it's easier, and I've had really good success. And I would say I've only technically virginized one.
Okay.
The virginizing, of course, requires extra equipment now. Something that can use not only software on your computer, and then a device to connect to the chip itself, and wires or clips, or you remove the chip and put it on a board, and now you're going in and you're reading what's on that chip, which is usually in hexadecimal, and they have different we'll call them slots with cells in them and numbers, and they house various amounts of information, whether it's storing like the VIN number, immobilizer information, key IDs or whatnot, maybe the odometer reading, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
so these are like EEPROM chip, right? So
yes.
And give me a visual on what this is. Is this a multi-leg chip and with legs on either side, or is this going all the way around the chip, like a square chip with legs all the way around?
So of the ones I've done, not that there's been a vast majority of them, but the ones I've done of all but 2 of them were 6-legged.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 8-leg. Sorry, 8-leg chips.
So 4 on each side.
Yes.
So and those are all surface mounted, correct?
Yep.
And so you're just getting in there, you're heating it up, you're wicking the solder off there, getting it to move around, you pull it out, and then you're putting it into a chip reader, right?
Yep.
And then basically it reads the hex data out, and then you could basically make a copy of that and then put a blank chip in there, or you taking...
some people are big proponents of that. I have not done that, but I like the idea is I start buying up these common chips that are blank, and I read the information off the original chip and then try to burn it to a new chip and install the new chip, always preserving the original one there. So I'm not ever without, the original data. That seems very, very smart to me.
Yeah. So that's kind of like a non-destructive mode. Right.
Yep.
So
and
that's cool.
Some of these I've been lucky where I've been able to use a chip clip that measures everything in circuit. So I do not remove it from the board. I just clip that chip, and it, has contacts for all 8 legs, and it is able to power it up, read the information off of it, and I can save that. Then I can go to the chip that's on the new/used or the used/new module. Clip it on the same way, and if I want to read that, but invariably I want to rewrite it, and now I've just reburned this chip to be like the first chip, and I've had pretty good success with that where need be to allow the the module doesn't set, or I don't get modules setting VIN mismatch errors. The car starts, recognizes the keys. I've basically taken an all good module, all but used, and just basically tricked everything into thinking it's that first module. Is probably the easiest way to explain it. Not that it's all that complex. It sounds kind of complex if you're new to it, but it's not.
Right. It's not impossible. And I mean, I got a good visual there. That's pretty interesting. So
and some cars, some stuff is way more complex than that. One BMW I had, the chip was not 8 legs. It was a lot.
A lot of legs, huh?
Yeah, and that was that took a long time for me to finally succeed and win. But I got it. The shop lost a lot of money on that one.
But you gained a lot of knowledge at the same time, right?
Yeah. It's, and when you do get the wins like that, you do build up a reputation. There's something to be said about that there is some marketing in there, not trying to justify losses on a whole bunch of vehicles, but there is something to be said on some of the stuff too. If that's a direction you want to take and you have the personnel in place that are interested in it and willing to spend some of your time and their time to learn and improve and get better, you're going to take a few licks, but I think the end game could be, positive. Lucrative might be a little exaggeration, but at least now you're offering something nobody else does, another revenue stream, another way to relate with your other competition.
Another thing I throw in there, it's personal investment. So you, as a technician, you just set yourself apart from those who don't or aren't even going to try. So, when you get in that situation where we have no choice, if we could fix this, we'd be up and running. You got someone to do it. And, and it's a lot of fun. It's just a lot of fun. And it gets you, again, interested in electronics. The more you learn, the easier everything becomes. And, Scott, we've talked about this before, the brain of the automotive technician. Man, this is just another level to it. It's just absolutely amazing for us older folks that have been around since the cars are rather basic to what it is now. And, the skill set of an advanced automotive technician just keeps stepping up. And this is going to be another great chapter.
Yeah, it's definitely a marketable skill set. So, imagine you're a technician, you're learning all these new skills, right? And you say you relocate or something. Maybe your wife gets relocated, and you follow your wife, and you're looking for a job, and you walk into a shop and you say, "Hey, I can do all this, but I can also do this." It would probably open somebody's eyes and go, "Wow, that's pretty incredible. Tell me more." So, yeah. Matt, back on that equipment, the stuff that can read the chip in the vehicle, or I'm sorry, in the module itself. So, what on that kind of equipment? Where do you go to get that stuff?
Some of them is available already, just from one is just an aftermarket scan tool manufacturer has some immobilizer tools.
Okay. So the tool that aftermarket scan tool provider actually has a package that offers these inboard chip reading components. Can you tell me what that is? What tool is it?
I didn't know if I should be.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Let's find out what that is.
Yeah. Autel.
Okay.
About, I don't think it's 2 years ago, but they bought up a company called Auro, AURO, that was kind of using the Autel scan tool platforms from the MS908 and the maybe the 906. Anyways, they're using their kind of their hardware with some more hardware and software to do immobilizer functions. That was where it was really aimed at, was immobilizer and locksmiths.
Okay.
And Auro, there's some issues with that. It doesn't matter. Autel bought them out. And now Autel has a couple of products, the IM series. The one is the IM608 and the other is the IM508.
Mm-hmm.
The 608 is the flagship. But they both come with interfaces, not only to plug into the DLC, because there's a lot of immobilizer functions you can just do through the DLC and some button pushing.
Mm-hmm.
There's also an interface that allows you access to the chip level, board level, chip level.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them you can just clip and access in circuit, if you will, or on the board. And then some of them, they have other boards that you take the chip off, desolder it, solder it onto this board, and that allows you access.
Okay.
And, it's better than it was. I think they're always getting better, not to sound like a commercial, but the reality is when I first got my 508, it would piss me off more than anything. It would really frustrate me more than anything.
Okay.
I had other tools that I would use successfully, but while I would say over the last year or so, the updates, it's gotten better and better and better and more impressive and more impressive. And I think they're just going to keep getting better and better and better. And then a lot of these other tools, you go to locksmith websites. And there's a few of them, but they're all professional. Some of them, when I signed up and I tried to order tools from them, the sales representative divided by region would call me up and kind of interview me a little bit. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where do you work? What do you do? Do you have an LSID? Before they would send me any products.
Okay. That sounds pretty credible. That's good.
I liked that. I really did. That was almost endearing to me that they called me up before they would send me this product I ordered, before they took my money, and find out if I was legit, an auto tech, locksmith, something like that. And before they would send me these products. So I've slowly built up an arsenal, just like diagnostic equipment, scan tools, scopes, whatnot, probes. Same thing in this world. I'm continuing to build my arsenal, and there's a lot of products out there, and kind of like scan tools, you got to have more than one. One might do really well on these vehicles and not so good on these vehicles, and it doesn't seem like there's one that just does it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've realized that over the years. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, and that's what the technician needs to know is what those strengths and weaknesses are, because you don't want to end up spending a bunch of time finding out that tool comes up short on this car line most of the time, and you got another tool that could just keep you going and get the problem taken care of. So back on the tool, the RO, that's built in now to some of the tools that you were mentioning. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the Autel series now is the IM series.
IM, okay.
You can go AESwave, sells all Autel products, period. But they have both of these available on AESwave.com, and the IM608 is like the flagship. That is full-blown diagnostics, not just immobilizer diagnostics or kind of what we're talking about. I'm talking about automotive diagnostics, pulling codes, looking at data, performing special functions, bidirectional controls, and whatnot. It's not a complete replacement for like the 908P or the Elite that have some functions with programming, specifically with like BMW that the IM608 doesn't have. But all in all, I think you could make a very strong argument that IM608 is a full function, full blown aftermarket scan tool. And then it comes with these pieces of equipment, or I would really call them interfaces and whatnot, to allow you to do immobilizer functions even at the module level, board level.
At the board level, yeah. Okay,
yes.
That is interesting. So yeah, I have to look into that. Sounds pretty cool. So
and the 508, not to keep dragging this out, but the 508 is really aimed more at, you already have a flagship scan tool like an Autel 908P or a Elite. You would get the 508, which is smaller, less expensive, and that should have virtually all the same functions as the IM608. Especially if you buy an interface they call the XP400, you should have all the same capability as the IM608 without the cost. You already have the other scan tools. So
right, okay. Really
so doubling up as much.
Right, okay. So, but more of the key functions, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, more of the key functions there.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's some good info. I really appreciate that. That's awesome. Okay, so I want to thank you guys for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time, and I hope we can do this again. I'm sure we run in the same circles, and we run into each other all the time. It's been kind of a bummer. We haven't been able to see each other in the last 3 or 4 months at various events because we're all in the shelter-in-place mode at the moment. So hopefully that's going to change, and so we can kind of turn things loose and go out and meet face-to-face again. So thank you guys very much. I really appreciate your time and input.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, Scott, thank you very much. And Matt, it was great listening to you, all the input.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I have proudly witnessed the pivoting of many of the traditional training organizations where they began delivering webinar-based training. I have attended several sessions over the past few months in my shop along with my staff and have to say that it's been pretty cool to be able to fill the void. The challenge we've seen recently, though, is that as business begins to rebound, we're finding that attending these live webinars can be a challenge. Fortunately, many of these training providers are recording these sessions and making them available. Take a look at the show notes for links to some of these training opportunities. I would also like to announce that P10 Magazine and Diagnostic Network recently partnered up to launch the Disaster Support User Group on Diagnostic Network. For more information, look to the show notes.
Hello, Newman.
And we'd love to field some of your questions, so please consider emailing us, podcasts@vehicleservicepros.com. Now that brings us to the end of the show, and we hope we're able to bring you some quality content and look forward to future episodes. And we're looking for your feedback, so if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the mailbag. And please hit the subscribe button to receive notifications on future episodes. Thanks for joining us.